Well, welcome everybody to our parent night tonight. I am Maria Wiscombe and I work for the Utah Parent Center as a parent consultant for Alpine School District. So I work specifically with parents and families in Alpine School District. But I'd like to welcome you and thanks for joining us tonight. We've got Karen Fairchild. She is a licensed clinical social worker and also a registered play therapist. And Karen and I have worked on a couple of boards together, so we've known each other for quite a while. But she's going to do our presentation tonight on impulse control. And I think you're going to find some really useful information that she's going to present. Again, if you have questions, please post them in the chat box and we will keep those going throughout the meeting. So Karen, I turn the time over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Well, Maria said this was her first time hosting. This is my first time presenting through a Zoom meeting. I've done lots of presentations, but never in this format. So it's a little different for me as well. I hope it goes okay. I'll definitely miss all the feedback of having a group in front of me. So we'll go ahead and get started in just a moment, I'll tell you a little bit more about me, but let's just kind of look at what we're going to be doing tonight, just to review. We'll be talking about how to help your child recognize their impulses. A lot of children don't even realize what an impulse is, or that it's something that they can learn to control. So we want to talk about how we do that. And then after they start to recognize what an impulse is, helping them learn ways to slow down their reactions to them. And then we'll finish off by talking about ways that can help motivate them to actually work at it and to even care whether they have good impulse control or not. Let's see. So I'd just like to start with this little bit of an introduction. When it comes to impulse control, there are no quick fixes. I know a lot of parents are disappointed that I don't have like a magic wand or a really quick cure. A lot of the things I like to teach parents are things that work over time, and a lot of them are dependent on your specific child's age, level of functioning, their emotional maturity, their cognitive ability. All of those things play into how that's going to look. And I even thought today, even as adults, we're still working on our impulse control. So this is a lifelong process, and it's much harder for some of these children than for others. And I like to say we're literally trying to change brain wiring. And with the children that are able, I like to even talk to them about that, you know, this can work, and that we're going to be working to actually change the way your brain reacts to things. As parents, I like to keep a perspective of that we're starting out as coaches. We're really having to teach them what they need to do. And eventually we want to transition to cheerleaders. And we'll talk more about that when we get into motivation. Our role changes over time, and we want to keep working at that. One of my favorite words in therapy, I work as a mental health counselor with a large percentage, pretty much all of my caseload has some developmental disability associated with it, or we'll talk more about that in later too, but I love the word effective. It doesn't matter if a strategy works for someone else's child if it doesn't work for yours. And so you're really trying to practice a lot of patience and curiosity to see what really works for your child. And I feel like in my role, my professional role, I'm a helper with brainstorming to figure out what might work, but we always want to have that curiosity and figure out what actually is effective. And again, like I started to say, I really like strategies that are sustainable over time and that preserve relationships. And sometimes I think when people hear my passion for preserving relationships, they think maybe I'm really easy on behaviors, and I'm really not. I just think that the priority needs to be on strategies that do both, that we can utilize over time and still preserve relationships. And that's really important to me. And I'll tell you a little bit more why. This is my family, and I started my journey in knowing anything about impulse control because of my own children, I now have 3 adult children that have autism. In the autism world, I would say that my 2 of them are very high functioning, but still quite impaired by autism, than a son that has more moderate symptoms with more of the classic language delay and so forth, where the other 2 have more high IQ, very high IQ, and just struggle with more of the social emotional issues. I also was a stay-at-home mom for about 20 years, my first 20 years of my adult life, and then went back to school. And I've had the opportunity and privilege to work in, I worked in the Giant Steps Autism Preschool program for about 9 years, where they have a strong behavioral approach. I feel like they do a very good job of approaching the whole family system and all the needs of a child, every aspect. But I've also worked at the Family Support and Treatment Center, where I focused more on trauma. And I've also spent many years and still have connections to early intervention with the birth to 3, as well as into the young adults, where I taught part of the curriculum for the Passages program at UVU. So I've got a kind of birth to adult kind of range that I love to focus on. But as we go through these principles tonight, I hope that some of them will resonate with you, or at least give you some things to try and to practice that curiosity with, to see what actually might be effective for your child if there's things that you haven't tried before. All right. Just as in the way of introduction, there's a lot of conditions that affect impulse control, and I'm sure this is not a complete list. These are the ones I commonly work with. I won't read through all those, but a lot of those are ones that affect a child. I should have probably put trauma on there too, because that can also affect a child's impulse control. I know as I go along in this presentation, I'm going to find things I want to add. This is, I've talked about these things all day, but this is my first time pulling this all together in a PowerPoint form. So that's a note for me right now that I want to write trauma on that slide, because that would be another one that's common to affect those impulse control issues. In my world, there are no bad kids, just impressionable, conflicted young people wrestling with emotions and impulses, trying to communicate their feelings and needs the only way they know how. And I guess I should say too, sometimes we think, well, they know, I've told them, we've taught them, they can repeat back, but there's a difference between knowing it in their head and actually learning the skills to be able to implement it in the times of stress, which we need to work towards as well. These are straight from Pinterest, but I thought these were really matched my philosophy a lot too. It says challenging behavior occurs when the demands and expectations being placed on a child outstrip the skills they have to respond. And then this one, you can't teach children to behave better by making them feel worse. When children feel better, they behave better. And I think sometimes as parents, when I've spoken to them, they are really concerned, well, I can't just let them get away with that. There has to be a consequence. And I do believe in consequences. I prefer more natural and logical, and keeping in mind that children that struggle with impulse control are already experiencing many natural, difficult consequences from their impulsive behavior. So sometimes we don't need to pile a lot more on. Just something to think about. Okay, let's see. Children who have impulse control problems can often start to develop a really negative identity, which always kind of makes my heart sad, and it's nobody's fault, but when they have repeated failures with their behavior, I have children coming in and telling me they're lazy when they're 4 and things like that. It just makes my heart sad that they're already picking up and these examples, like I said, my parents are unsatisfiable. They probably wouldn't use that word, but they come in with that kind of feeling like I can't do anything right. I'm always in trouble. And that in and of itself, when they start to develop an identity of not being able to do it or things not working that people have suggested, that really saps their motivation to keep trying. And so we're trying to find ways to continue to help that motivation stay alive and to continue to grow. Parents come in discouraged too, thinking their children just don't listen. The parents feeling like they just can't handle it anymore. They've tried everything and nothing works. And so these are some of the things that happen when we're working with a child with impulse control challenges.
Karen,
Yes.
can I ask a question? I think
Yes.
that it fits in right here. So one of the participants asked if a parent suffers from impulse control as well, how does that change the map? For example, their son rages and the parent also struggles with angry responses.
We're getting very shortly, I think we'll get to something called the escalation curve, and I'll try to cover that there. If I don't, remind me that because that applies to both parents and children when there's those escalations and emotions. So I'll try to cover that there. I do feel very strongly that we can restore that positive identity. I like to use the word yet a lot. That was a word I learned to use back when I worked at Kids on the Move. I was trained to use that on reports about the babies that couldn't walk, to always add, not to say they couldn't walk, they're not walking yet. We wanted to keep that hopeful language, and we'll talk more about that kind of positive language we want to use, and being able to notice those lower levels of frustration. That's one thing we're really working with ourselves and with children, to catch those lower levels before it does become the big outburst, and recognizing and celebrating when we do catch it and don't go to our worst impulse control reactions. So let's start with, this is ongoing, but recognizing impulses. I have these simplistic definitions that I like, and they come right from a workbook that I use. And at the end of my PowerPoint, I put a lot of my favorite books I use, and we'll talk more about why I use so many books. But this definition is an impulse, a feeling or urge I have to do something. Very simple. And I teach this to any of the kids that are capable of learning that simple of a concept. And then just really learning to stop and think, and I'll have them even practice putting their hand up for stop and pointing to their brain for think, and we'll just do realizing we're trying to slow that down. And that's one of the first, I want them to know what an impulse is and what impulse control looks like. And I'll show you some more with that. One thing I've just recently been articulating a little bit differently than I have in the past, and this comes from the particular therapy model of DBT that some of you may have heard of, just the idea that emotions always have a biological urge attached to them. When we're angry, there's this natural biological urge to want to attack. If we're afraid, our natural biological urge is to run away or avoid, and so on. And so these are biologically wired into us. And we'll talk more about why that's so hard for some children or some of us to control those impulses. There's a biological component to that that's wired in. That's very natural, but sometimes just because it's natural doesn't mean it's okay the way we act sometimes. I just wanted to go through this list of strategies that I often try to employ. Making things visual for a highly reactive child can be almost magical. I just had a girl in my office today, and last time she and her mom were in, the mom had just been talking about how horrible their morning routine was trying to get ready for school. And when they came in today, I asked how things were going with that. And she said, oh, ever since we made the checklist, everything's been going so much better. And the whole tone of the relationship, because of that huge frustration since school has started, was calmed down, just because and it's not always that easy, but she had made it more visual for her of what the expectations were. Because sometimes once the child gets highly emotional, they're not hearing our verbal at that point, but for whatever reason, brains often do better to register things that they see. We want to make things really concrete and specific, very structured as much as we can. I like to remind parents to be more flexible. One of my phrases I like that I picked up somewhere was, you don't want to be more inflexible than your child. I mean, sometimes we're told so much as a parent that we have to be consistent. But we also want to teach flexibility. And I think sometimes we need to model flexibility when it's appropriate. And that, I know that's a hard dance sometimes, but we don't want to be teaching rigidity more than they already have within them sometimes. The successive approximations is kind of a behavioral term talking about, we want to be celebrating things as they get closer and closer to the behavior that we want. And sometimes we get so stuck on the end result that we can't celebrate that they did something that was getting closer to what we want. And again, that can help keep motivation alive too, if we can remember to celebrate those successive approximations when they're getting closer and closer to the behavior that we are wanting. Again, for each of your children that you're working with is going to be developmentally. I don't know what all the ages of everybody that's here are, but and regardless of age, children are all going to be at different developmental stages. So you're going to have to consider what's developmentally appropriate. This picture on this slide is actually my son, who has the most significant autism. I'm just thinking back, there was a time where he went through a really horrible phase where he was purposely running in front of cars in front of my house. And it was horrifying, and we were doing everything we could to try to keep him safe, but he would inevitably, you know, being the fourth child, someone would leave a door unlatched or whatever, and he would run out there. And in a fit of desperation, I got a poster board and put smiley faces all over it. And his understanding at that age was, I think I attached a treat to it, a picture of a treat, and said if he had his smiley faces, I filled this whole poster board with smiley faces in blocks of 3s. And I told him if he wanted the treat, he had to have all 3 of his smiley faces. And sometime in there, he ran into the road again. And I came in, I brought him to the chart and visually crossed it out right in front of him. And he was so disappointed to lose that smiley face. He actually never went in the road again. He was just that visual thing after all the talking to him. But that was what he could comprehend at the time. He was probably about 3 or 4. I can't even remember for sure. Again, utilizing special interests, that can be really fun. He is a big Star Wars fan, so we've used that a lot to help him do some of the things that he's needed to do. Being really aware of learning styles, whatever that may be, and attention span. Those all come into play when we're thinking of some kind of a way to work on this. Again, here's my keeping things visual. Checklist, depending on developmental level, any kind of a chart. For our hyperverbal kids that are disagreeing all the time, a lot of times writing things out in a contract form can help. I have quite a few clients we have to do that. I've got examples of some punch cards that I like to use with my clients. Sometimes the parents are using them at home, or they're bringing them back and I'm rewarding them with something. Just the thing I like about punch cards is they have just that act of actually punching a hole puncher through the hole is really satisfying when they've actually done what they need to do. I think in the handout that you may have gotten, I didn't have social stories. That's something that I thought of later that I wanted to make sure was in here. If you're familiar with those, are great use. At the very end of the PowerPoint, I think on the very end of my resources, there's some kind of pre-printed books that I inherited at some point that have a lot of concepts that are written in a very social story kind of format. But it's always great if your child has a specific behavioral thing to make them the star of their stories. If you're not familiar with those, I would look those up. From Carol Gray is the writer of those. They work beautifully for some children because they become the star of the story. We're showing them doing well, and a lot of kids will really attach to those. I use a lot of books in therapy. I'm kind of I have a lot of books but I keep getting more. I just love a lot of the children I work with that do have impulse challenges just respond super well to the visuals in the books. And there's something about it being in a story that matches the problem they're having. It's like, oh, this isn't just me. This is a real thing. And then the solutions are there. And a lot of my kids that can't sit still for anything will sit still really well and listen to a story and process them with me. So in fact, the list I have at the end is just a very partial part of what I use, but some of my favorites. This is another visual I like to show to both children and parents. Just a lot of kids that that have impulse control problems, because of their failures and so forth, they get tired of trying new things, or they just are already in that kind of failure mindset. I really like to encourage them out of their comfort zone. And we talk about what a comfort zone is and why we don't want to stay there all the time. It's listed up there, but if we just do things that are comfortable, after a while that becomes depressing, sludgy, and isolating and boring. If we push too hard or in a way that a child's not ready for, then we kind of push them into this danger zone where their skills can't manage yet. And so we're trying to find that healthy balance of getting them in the growth zone. I like to say some children, probably even adults, don't have much of a growth zone. They kind of go right from their comfort zone right into the danger zone. And then we'll talk about it in terms of growing the growth zone. We need to grow your growth zone. We need to find some things that you can do that will be a little bit uncomfortable, but you have enough skills to tolerate that won't be so overwhelming to you. And I know as a parent, one of my daughter that has autism, I know I used to push her inadvertently into the danger zone a lot. I just thought, oh, you certainly know this, because she could repeat back all the skills, but then she'd get in the situation and she really wasn't able to utilize them for quite some time until she got some more maturity under her belt and some more experience. But just walking that line with your child between that comfort zone and the danger zone, and trying to work on that really healthy growth zone where they can get better and better at the skills that we're trying to teach them. I think I've kind of said this, but just reiterate that your child may currently believe that their reactions are uncontrollable. They just might believe they can't help it. And I feel like I spend a lot of time in therapy working with kids and parents to help the child re-believe that this is something they can learn to do, that they can learn skills to manage it. And then just a big point with a lot of these children, again, I kind of mentioned this too, that many children experience bigger than average emotional reactions, and that can have a biological basis. It can have just from the experiences or any kind of traumatic experiences they had. And we'll talk a little tiny bit more about trauma coming up too, but I just say that doesn't give them an excuse not to learn impulse control. They're just going to need better than average strategies, and they're going to have to really work to manage them and keep at it in a really forward-moving kind of a way. There's a term called alexithymia that's relatively new to me in the last 10 years or so, but it's some children and adults actually even have very little self-awareness of their emotions. They have a hard time identifying and describing feelings and distinguishing emotions from bodily sensations, and all of that's very hard for them. But I still feel like there's a lot of growth that can happen. If any of you are familiar with Dan Siegel, he wrote the book like The Whole Brain Child and a few others that I love, but one of his famous phrases is "name it to tame it." And the brain science is showing that just the very act of identifying an emotion starts to calm it. And so that's why I love starting with really young children, teaching them really good emotion words. I like nothing more than to hear a tiny toddler, 2 or 3 year old say, "I'm so frustrated." I just love for them to know emotion words. And I think it's so wise. And sometimes we'll talk about this more too, but when we get in that emotion coaching role, we might say, "Oh, you seem really frustrated." And they might yell at you and say, "No, I'm not frustrated, I'm mad." But to me, that's perfect, because then they've told you what they feel, and we want them to do that. We want to really work on the idea of personal responsibility, using language that helps lead them towards, you know, this is really up to them ultimately to control their emotions. We can't do it for them. But so we want to kind of put that responsibility while still being there for them to help them as they're still learning, and get out of that mindset that they are a victim to their bodies or to their circumstances. We really want to keep teaching them that they can get this, and we're going to be with them every step of the way, and eventually they're going to be able to do it. Let's see. I wanted to show you. I'm going to try going out of my slide for a minute and show you a couple things. Hopefully I can get back in. Let's see. I don't know how to make me big. I see Maria big, but is there a way to make me big, Maria? Oh. Well, maybe not. I don't know. I'll just show you on the small screen and maybe you can get the idea. And Maria, you're muted. I can't hear you if you're saying anything.
I think you won't be big on your screen, but you'll be big on everybody.
Oh, I'll be big on everyone else. Okay, that tells you how much I know about this technology. Okay, well, I'll show you. This is my Hoberman sphere. So you've probably seen these. I like to use these, and they're very attention grabbing with children, but I use it for adults too. I have a play therapist mindset, but I like to use this to represent when it's kind of in its smallest stages, calm. And then I talk about how if this is like kind of a normal, I'm backing up a little, a normal reaction, a normal level of emotional reaction. Some of our kids are really feeling it like clear out here. And I talk to them about how uncomfortable that is when a feeling feels that big. And I just tell them we're really working to help them be able to take their emotions back down to a more normal level and eventually back to calm. But, you know, even if it gets there, we're trying to teach them to maybe catch their emotions at more the middle range before it gets the biggest range. That really grabs their attention. I like to use that. I'm going to grab one other thing. You've probably seen these. It's just a glitter jar that I made. Mine's kind of girly, but it's got glitter here in the bottom, and I shake it up and I say, when we're upset, it's so busy inside of our bodies. All those stress chemicals are raging through our bodies. And if I leave this, I'll ask them, so what happens with this glitter jar when I put it down and give it some time? And that goes down. And I'll even tell them in real life, our bodies, it takes about, once we're upset, if we're doing really good things to calm our bodies down, it takes about 20 minutes for all those stress chemicals to go down if we're doing really healthy calming strategies. If we're not, we can stay upset for a lot longer, which isn't comfortable at all. So we're trying to help them work towards more comfort by learning to make, you know, that's part of the motivation too, is just reminding them how much better it feels to be under control. And I love that when that starts to happen. Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen again. Oh, I hope it's back. It looks to be, yay. Like I said, this is all new to me, presenting this way. So, and just out there, I forgot to pull it out of the bag, but I'll just keep going. But I do also have a 3-dimensional brain that a dad made for me on his 3D printer. And it separates by the hemispheres. And I like to show them the brain. And if I don't have my brain handy, you know, my model of the brain, I'll just point, this is where we do our good thinking. And in the very centers of our brain that I can't touch, that's where our emotions are. And we've got to, when we're really upset, the thinking part of our brain kicks off and our emotion centers take over. And that's when we start to make really poor choices. So we're trying to do things, we'll talk more about what those are, to keep our mind and body calm enough so we can stay in that good thinking part of our brain. One of my clients pointed out to me that there's a really cute song from a cartoon called Esme and Roy. You can find it out there on YouTube that has a glitter jar song. It's more for younger kids, but it's a cute one that talks about that very thing about calming your body down with your glitter jar. All right, let's see. I usually draw this as a stick figure on my whiteboard, but this is something my son created for me. I really like to talk about and like I said, I draw this kind of in stick figure form on my whiteboard. I'll draw a stick figure with just their brain and then their heart and their gut. And I'll talk about the connection between what we're thinking and what we're feeling and how strong that is. And so like on this one, I show if we're thinking a really negative thought, like that's not fair, our body will react to that almost immediately. And then when our body reacts, then our brain kind of reinforces that this really isn't fair. Even my body's reacting. And then we get this kind of cycle that we can't break out of. It's very powerful. We're trying to, we can do it either way. We can either change the thought to something more healthy and calm our body that way, or we can calm our body, which helps us get back to that thinking brain, which starts another kind of loop if we break the negative cycle and get a more positive loop going. And again, I'll draw that out and I'll even take maybe something they've said and say, how can we change that thought to something that's more healthy, hopeful, and helpful, and we'll work that through. And sometimes we go through that lots of different ways and different things, but I really want those that can to understand that huge mind-body connection, and then how important it is to learn to use those body calming strategies. I often say to kids, we only have one central nervous system, and that's what we have to master, is learning how to calm that down. And that involves our brain. And then there's the vagal nerve that goes right from our brain down our spine and fans out into our gut. And really, I am not a brain scientist, but I've found that for some of my more logical kids that can work. I know that we're not always working with logic, especially when they're at their most escalated point. Just commonalities with a lot of kids, they're often socially and emotionally immature and struggling. A lot of times, we've kind of said that, they are already feeling like nothing works. They may be able to do some of these in one setting and not in another. It's really common with the kids I work with, for some of them, that they can't hold it together at home, but they'll hold it together all day at school and then let it all loose at home. But that's usually, I believe, because they're exhausted from holding it. They're socially aware enough, usually those kids are, to hold it together at school, but then the family gets the full force of all that exhaustion when they get home. Some kids can't hold it together either setting, but it's hard for them to do it, like I said, or if in an we'll talk a little bit about sensory too, but sometimes in those overstimulating sensory, a lot of the children I work with have a really hard time seeing anybody else's perspective. I love to use some of the books on perspective taking and so forth. A lot of these kids are more prone to addictive tendencies because of the dopamine hits that they're getting. So I try to work on a lot of life balance around that to get them to make sure. I tell them, if the only thing that sounds fun is your electronics, then we need to help your brain get healthy again, because that's not a healthy way to live. We got to get back so your brain can enjoy other things too. And a lot of these kids are very sensitive. Someone asked about parents' role in this. That's beginning of that is a lot of these kids, if we're angry, they're going to pick up on that as well. I'm just checking the time here. I'm probably talking too much. Okay. This is just a little bit about trauma. I worked in a trauma and abuse center, like I said, for many years, but it's occurred to me over time that even if a child doesn't have like what I would call a big T trauma, like any specific abuse per se, some of them may have that, but a lot of them are functioning with what I call little T trauma, just from those repeated patterns of failure. They just feel and their systems are so sensitive to things that go wrong. A little failure that might seem like a little thing to one of us may feel huge to them, or something, or someone being disappointed in them can feel so huge because of that overactive emotion system. And some of them have been victims of bullying or had other traumas like that. And then another commonality, like I've kind of mentioned before too, a lot of the kids I see have really overactive sensory and emotional systems. And I can't tell you how many kids come in, even that are very verbal, that the first thing out of their mouth is, I don't know, because they're having kind of a mini fight or flight response just to that question. So sometimes learning to give them some space helps. Okay, let's keep going. This is that escalation curve I was talking about. And so now we're into trying to help slow down some of these impulse reactions. Um, I hear from a lot of parents that they just go from 0 to 5, well, this scale would be 0 to 3 before I even know it. And I'll draw this out even for the kids. This is something I go through with both children and parents. I'll draw this out for the kids. I'll just usually write calm down here at the, see if I can get my mouse back here, the calm by the baseline, and I'll put really upset up here and then put calm back over here for the kids. But we're trying to teach them that they can, if they can start paying attention to the lower levels of frustration before they just burst out into some kind of impulsive action, that's going to feel so much better. I will say sometimes if we can feel it coming up and we can do our skills to turn it back around, that's going to feel so much better. Or you can visualize it just skipping all the way across. Or even if it does go all the way up here, knowing that there are things we can do to make that recovery time faster. And that those are the things we want to work on. The next few slides, I think it's 2 or 3, kind of show for parents what your job is during all those phases. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I do like to point out that a lot of times as parents, we're trying to mete out consequences when the children are here. They're literally not able to process. They're in their emotion centers of their brain. They can't even hear you. And then sometimes we may start to try to process even here and it flips them right back up. Or the consequences are trying to reason or do logic. They can't hear that. And like I said, the next couple slides will give you ideas for what to do during that phase. But trying the teaching doesn't happen until way after, not until they're well calmed down. That's when they're ready to learn and listen to maybe reteaching the skills and how they could have been utilized in that, whatever that situation was. And so I'm going to flip through these. You've got those, I believe. I like to use scaling in my work. For some of the kids, it works really well. I'm sure you've seen, like, some of you may have seen the zones of regulation. It's very similar to that, but just a lot of kids, if you were to ask them, think everything's a 5. It's just that big, huge ball, like my ball, everything's a 5. And we're trying to help them learn that, maybe this was after a 3. I call it sometimes, you can't reason this with them necessarily in the moment, but someone I heard call it a social autopsy, when you go back and kind of talk about the situation afterwards and what led to the outburst or the impulsive action, and kind of go backwards and do that autopsy to see what happened. And then started to help them compare the intensity of their feeling to the reality of the facts. Again, that's not going to happen well during the crisis, but I think it can help well on the upside of that curve to be able to say, oh, you're starting to I can feel you coming up to a 2 or 3. Let's see what we can do to bring that down before you peak. They can start to understand that language of scaling things.
Hey, Karen.
Yes.
Just a question on that. Back one slide on the scale.
On the curve or the?
On the scale.
Okay.
On the 5-point scale. So I've heard even teachers use this type of scale, and they practice ahead of time as far as like what it looks like to be at a 1 and what it looks like to be at a 2. And even not just what it looks like, but how are they feeling, and so that the student or the child can learn to just breaking it down just a little.
Yeah, you can break it down a lot of different ways. I've seen charts with this where what's okay to do at each of those levels, what's not okay to do. I like using this, even I use it on my grandkids sometimes when they're in my house, to talk about their volume level. Let's get it back down to a 3. We're in the house, so you can use the scale for a lot of things just to help them learn. I just think it's so healthy in that process of learning to self-manage, to get those different levels of things and when they're appropriate. But yeah, you're perfect, Maria. Yeah, you can use that a lot of different ways. I can't remember if that's on my list at the end or not, but there is a book called The Incredible 5-Point Scale that has tons of examples of how to use that. All right. I teach a lot of assertiveness, even with my littles. I have this cool, calm, and confident workbook I use a lot in therapy, where we talk about the difference between assertive and passive and aggressive behavior. And it's always amazing to me how well so many of the children that have that ability pick up on those terms, and figure out how much better it feels to live life in an assertive way, and to manage their anger, and not just, we teach all these skills of ways to be more assertive rather than going right to aggression, or not living passively to where all of a sudden they hold it in, and then they're like a volcano, and become aggressive. There's also, and this is in the end list, a workbook I use a lot called, there's 2 different versions. One's elementary level and one's middle school level for impulse control. It's a whole workbook, and I'll go through some of those principles with the kids as appropriate. I work a lot with kids on trying to learn to calm. I just giggle a little because I can't tell you how many times kids come in and just almost, breathing doesn't work. I had a 12-year-old kind of have a fit the other day with me, just telling me how much he hates meditation. And so I sometimes have to go backwards with him a little bit, and kind of back to the brain science, and say, hey, it's not that these don't work. They will work if we can help you learn to do them correctly in a way that's effective. It's just brain science. We just have our central nervous system to calm down, and telling them how powerful the breath can be as a calming tool, but we've got to find ways to help them start to believe that and to experience it in a positive way. So like I said, I have so many coming in that already hate being told to breathe or take a deep breath. They hate it. So I pull out some more fun things, or some just kind of backstep with them again, and again, try to convince them that there are ways that it could work. There's a little book called Sitting Still Like a Frog that has a CD that goes through childlike levels of teaching relaxation, mindfulness, and so forth, breathing, that I really like. I'll show you the Angry Birds thing, and we'll talk about that in a second. I'll talk, depending on functioning level, talk a lot about the power of your brain and how you can change the channel in your brain. That you can't always control what your brain thinks, but I like to say it's one of our human superpowers to be able to change the channel in our brain to something more positive, more healthy. And we can't just tell our brain to stop thinking, but we can teach our brain to think things more in a more healthy way. Kind of that river of thought that our brains are always thinking, but we have the power to decide how much power we give to that thought, or if we can just let it go through it like a river, go, ooh, that wasn't a very helpful thought I just had. Again, depending on functioning level. This is just a fun thing that actually a parent, I learned so many things from parents that shared with me a long time ago. A lot of the kids like that, but I'm pretty convinced if there's any special interest your child has, there's probably something out there that you could make your own to kind of simulate. I know one of my coworkers does a lot of work with kids with autism, and he does a whole superpower thing, or superhero kind of a thing. So just coming up with ways to relate to ways people have to learn to cool down. This is one that I like to use with the kids, and talk about that quiet place, that bird's nest that we all need to go to. Oh, I forgot to say, way back on that escalation curve, I wanted to say, parents, we sometimes have this challenge. If we have problems with impulse control, we sometimes escalate right with the kids. And our goal as a parent, we're trying to model calmness. We're going to have to practice not escalating with them. But even if we do, I know in real life, I'm a parent too, and I've had very tricky children to raise. If we blow it, it's a really great chance to model an authentic apology repair with the child and say, hey, I'm going to keep trying to. We're going to keep figuring this out, again, in that nice forward moving language. And so if we have problems, and like I said, I believe most of us have impulse control problems in one way or another, but just kind of owning our humanness in that too, but continuing to work to try to model if we feel ourselves going up the escalation curve as a parent. Great time to have our plans for what am I going to do. I think this is in here somewhere, but I used to often give myself a timeout. I'd say to my kids, Mom's having a timeout right now because anything I do right now is not going to be nice, and I'll be back when I'm ready to be nice again. And I know with some kids you can't leave them to do that, but figuring out you have to have a strategy for when you're starting to lose it, whatever that may be. I think the parents that get into trouble that we hear about on the news are the ones that don't have a plan, or they aren't willing to acknowledge that I think any parent's capable of losing it. And so we want to just have those plans for what we're going to do when we're starting to lose it. Whatever break we need to take or resource we need to reach out to ourselves. Sensory overload is a big issue for a lot of the kids that have issues with impulse control. I have found with my own experience with my own kids that traditional timeouts didn't work very well. The only way that was ever effective with my kids was to tell them, as soon as you're ready to be, control yourself or whatever, not hit your brother or whatever, then you are welcome to join us. We want you with us. And that became the most effective way, is to really, that was the standard. You can join back with us. We want you as soon as, like I said, having big consequences just seemed to escalate them more. The goal was to get them to calm. Jumping back up a little bit too, just a lot of kids really talking with them during calm times about what their strategies are. And I tell them they need to have a whole menu of ideas, because some may work in some situations and you may be able to get yourself to do some in another, but I like to make those lists with them sometimes of what are their strategies. A lot of kids with sensory issues, I try to help remind them that a calm body reacts less. If you're getting all upset about something that's overstimulating and tensing into it, it's all going to feel worse. So if you've been practicing outside of those stressful times how to calm your body, then you're going to be able to do that. And I really strongly believe that body calming practice has to take place at times while they are calm, so they start to get that muscle memory of, oh yeah, that's what it feels like to take that deep breath and relax my body. Sensory diet, making sure, depending on what, that's a really good question for an occupational therapist, but just figuring out what they need more or less of. A lot of our kids need a lot of deep pressure type activities, or it can be the opposite. They need the light touch. So just figuring out what your child needs for calming. Again, back to that personal responsibility. We have a lot of people in our house that have sensory issues. And so they sometimes want to blame everybody else for their discomfort. And we'll say, hey, this is your thing. We're not trying to aggravate you, but you'll need to calm yourself down or take a break from us and then return. That taking a break and then re-engaging, sometimes kids just avoid their sensory triggers, and which actually over time may actually sensitize them more to the problem. So you want them to calm enough to try to re-engage so they can try again. Sometimes that can work, but as much as you can, you want them to calm and then come back, but give them that space to calm. We're trying to just show respect for everybody in the family. And I'll talk more about that when it comes to motivation as well. And sleep hygiene, sleep's huge. A lot of kids with impulse control problems are not sleeping well. And I am for whatever method you can come up with that's, healthy, that's, legitimate for working on sleep. Because if you can get sleep figured out, it takes so many of the problems away. So that's working on sleep hygiene is so important for these kids with impulse control problems. I always say with medication, I personally land way heavy on the side of skills, but there are often children that just because of the wiring of their brain, they can't even get to the point of utilizing the skills without medication, unfortunately. But I've also seen miracles with that, where just a little bit of the right dose of something, all of a sudden they can utilize their skills. I'm working with a young man right now that been diagnosed with like oppositional defiant disorder, which is always in a rage in his family. He got on a medication recently and things are so much, his mom is like incredible, just thinks it's incredible how much better he's able now to start. He's not perfect, but he's starting to use his skills, and he can use his skills. When I was working in a preschool program, closely with a psychiatrist at one point, and I'd see her prescribing medication to pretty little kids. And I asked her one day, does that ever concern you? And of course she was very cautious and very careful, but she made me think about it a little bit differently. Sometimes if you get the right medication at the right time and the right dose, it actually helps the brain to develop more healthily than a brain that hasn't had that medication to help. So like I said, I don't prescribe medication. That's not my role. This is totally anecdotal for me at this point, but there are now, you can get like a DNA test or a cheek swab to see which medication family is most likely to be helpful. And I've had a few clients utilize that, and it's made a big difference in their not having to do so many trial and errors with medication. So I don't know a lot about it, but I know it's been really effective for some of my clients to go through and get that screening that way.
Erin, I've got a question.
Yes.
Kind of along with the medical side of things.
Yeah.
So one parent asked, do we just talk to our pediatrician about this for any help they are able to provide? She asked it earlier on, but I thought it might fit.
Well, for the medication, yeah, you can talk to your pediatrician. Some pediatricians are more comfortable with the idea of medication, for children than others. And I know at least here in Utah County, we've had a chronic dearth of very many child psychiatrists. And so sometimes the waiting lists and so forth take a long time to get into them. But and I think, I know at least Dr. Swenson, when he was still here, would often require them to go through their pediatrician first anyway. And so, yeah. Did I answer that? Was that the question?
I think so, because another parent asked, where do we go for this, for the medication? So yeah, start with your pediatrician.
Yes.
And if he needs to refer you out.
Typically that's, yeah, because we're, at least like I said, here in Utah County, we don't have a lot of child psychiatrists. And they kind of, what I've been told is that they like to try to have the pediatrician start with it. And then if it's not working, then go through the child psychiatrist. So.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, where are we at in time? I'm just, I want to see. Okay, we're going to go through this pretty quickly. Okay, so as far as motivation goes, I know this can be a sticky thing for a lot of parents, and I get it. I know people think, I don't want to have to reward my child for good behavior. They should just do it because it's the right thing. But I kind of even like hold my hands up and I say, if this is the obstacle your child is facing, they may have quite a bit of motivation, but just not quite enough to surpass the obstacle that they have, whether it's their brain wiring or whatever it is. So for me, when I was in the midst of my most tricky parenting, I heard this quote from Dr. John Lund. He said, again, it's paraphrased, but he said something like, if there's something you know is important for your child that they do not yet understand the importance of, it is okay to give them an external motivator to do it. And that helped me through a lot of difficult parenting, because I thought, there's things I want them to do, but I'm tired of fighting the battle. And so we would find something they did care about and use that as the motivator to get them to do something I knew was good for them that they didn't yet appreciate the importance of. And that's kind of what I was just showing, that my little visual with that next bullet point. But also we're trying to get kind of behavioral momentum. If we can get good behavior and they actually feel how good that feels, they're more inclined to do more good behavior. And so sometimes that motivator, and I see it happen all the time, you might start with a motivator where they're expecting, I earned this, I earned this, I earned this. And pretty soon they oftentimes will start just doing it because, and they forget about the motivator after a while. It's just to get this good behavioral momentum. They sometimes, and you want to fade those out too, or once they've accomplished that successive approximation at one level, then you raise the bar a little bit incrementally and keep bumping So eventually it does work to them just doing it because it feels good to them to do the right thing and to be successful and to make progress. This is another thing just over time with my own kids and then professionally I've learned too. Sometimes we make the mistake of, our child does something horrific and we're frustrated. And so they may have already earned like points or stickers towards some motivating plan we've set up. And we take away, so, okay, you've just lost all your points. Well, when we start taking away the ones they earned, that just saps motivation so fast. And so I found it to be so much more helpful. There needs to be a consequence, and I agree with that, but I found it more effective to say, oh man, I was hoping you were going to earn that next, point or that next step. Let's try again. But you didn't get it this time, but let's try again. We don't want to take away what they earned. That's just one of the fastest ways I know to destroy motivation. And then another thing, if you have found something that was motivating for a while, sometimes parents will tell me, well, it was working and then it just stopped working. So they'll throw the whole behavior plan out the window, even if it was working. But sometimes you just need to revisit. Often you need to revisit the motivators or something they said they were working for. Suddenly they could care less about it. So sometimes it's just good to ask them, okay, so what will help you to keep working on this? What would be motivating to you right now? And of course, it has to be agreed upon and reasonable. I alluded to this earlier, but I just feel like the way we talk to kids is so important. I have a whole writing that I probably won't read because you should have it, that I wrote just about this topic. It's kind of included in here, but we just want to make sure our language is so oriented towards growth. We want to be using that word yet, or, we're going to figure this out. All of those things that help get an identity of growth rather than an identity of I'm a bad kid, or I'm in trouble, or why are you always doing that? We want to take out, we'll talk a little bit more about that too, but we want to, I've said that multiple times, that we want to just really emphasize how good it feels to be under control. A little bit on each of these: emotion coaching and being respectful and personal responsibility. Let me just, this is that writing. I'm not going to read this right now. You've got that, I believe. Just something I wrote just about that idea of avoiding that negative language or putting these negative labels on our children inadvertently. Emotion coaching. One of my favorite parenting books is Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. Although I recommended this to a mom recently, and she came back and told me that it was kind of driving her crazy because she thought she has a lot of children, and she said, I can't imagine having to process every single emotion this way. And I said, no, you're not going to be processing every emotion. You're going to be processing the patterns and the repeated problems. And always, I think, especially if you have multiple children with challenges, you're going to be, I used to say, I'm not ignoring anybody. I'm letting some of my kids float for a while. You're going to be picking and choosing what's kind of risen to the top of the priority for processing. But this book I found, and there's a shorter version of it that kind of has just the highlights, called What Am I Feeling, that I like as well. And it really is, it's very concrete. Dr. Gottman is both a psychologist and a statistician. So he has done a lot of research. And so a lot of the it's just my favorite parenting book overall. And one of the concepts from that book is Dr. Gottman's big on your child doesn't care what you think if they don't first believe that you understand and respect what they're feeling. And I think we're like that. If we don't believe someone understands us, we could care less what advice they want to give to us or any teaching. It's like, you don't even understand me. Why would I listen to you? And I think even if kids can't articulate that, if they don't feel emotionally validated, they don't care to listen to us. And like I said, I tend to err on the side of relationship rather than, I know for some parents and they may not agree with me, and I can accept that too, but if we're having to choose between having this really amazing consequence for what they did or work on the relationship, I personally would rather err on the side of relationship. Just in talking with parents of older kids, they get to a point in their later teens where they are they already know everything you think. They've heard everything all of your strategies and advice. The relationship ends up being all we have at some point. We want to work from that coaching into the relationship building. I like parenting to be really respectful, especially with these impulsive kids. I believe in explaining your why whenever possible, but also realizing in real life that it's not always time for the why, but having an agreement ahead of time of what you're going to say to your child when there's not time for the why. And we talked about this next one, just model making repairs and giving yourself times out. I like the phrase, we're trying to help them and ourselves feel the feeling rather than becoming the feeling. So instead of just becoming angry, we want to feel our anger and then make choices with our anger, not just let it take over us. This is just a review of like some of those reasons we want to keep working on impulse control. Is that proud feeling. We're making better choices. We're going to end up with better friends, better grades. We're going to get more things done. And that's right from that impulse control workbook. In your language, this is all stuff with how we're speaking to our kids. We really want to challenge and discourage using the words always, never, everyone. Kids and parents are guilty of this. We all are. We throw those words in and then we start arguing. That's not true. It wasn't last week. I didn't do it. The argument becomes about the always and never, everyone. I've had parents sit there and say, he always does this. And I think, okay, let's pull the always out of that. That's really defeating. Let's try again to, catch those times when they're not doing the thing. This is a phrase that we adopted as a family a long time ago. The fair isn't treating everyone the same. Fair is treating each person how they need to be treated. We've had a lot of conversations with my family about relative abilities and needs. And there's a cute book I just recently purchased called Fair Shares. It's from Usborne that has a beautiful, simple little parable about why that's true and why treating everyone exactly the same isn't going to be fair. And so we have to really look at everyone's needs. Another family motto in my family was we've just had to redefine success. I don't like to say lower expectations. I've had to change a lot of expectations. We even put it on a t-shirt right there. You see that was our family reunion shirt right there, redefining success since 1980. And I think part of being respectful is maybe, I love this, a lot of parents I've worked with, they come in and they've already worked out what they call the child's impulsive behavior. They'll call it their crazy energy, or, oh, what's your crazy energy? Or they have a name for it, but you want that to be something that they come up with you, so it's not offensive to them, just a way of talking about what we're working on. Let's see, we may have talked about a lot of these things. I use that word curiosity early on, but I love that idea. We're just wanting to have them practice that curiosity about, what did lead to that, but we're trying to help that within ourselves and with them to practice that curiosity. And if we know there's common things that trigger our kids, rehearsing those ahead of time, again, can help, but it's not going to be like I had that experience I shared with my daughter. She would know what to do in her head, but wouldn't always be able to pull it out in those high stress moments. But over time, she's 37 now. She's been able to manage her impulses pretty well. But we talked about the social autopsy, kind of going backwards when it didn't work and gently talking about, okay, what worked with that? What didn't work with that? That positive, we're going to keep helping you figure this out. Really quickly, I want to go through this. This is really important to me, but now as a mom who raised at least 3 kids with autism, and now they're all adults, there's a lot of things that, some of my dreams and so forth have had to change for them because of their various diagnoses. But more than anything, when it comes down to it, I've realized that what's most important to me for them, whether they impress the world with their accomplishments or anything else, I really want them to have that really healthy sense of self. And I believe this for my kids, your kids, everybody's kids, and even for ourselves. And this, I'm just going to paraphrase this, but I define yourself as who you're trying to be. It's who you want to be. I think that at your core is who you are, who you wanted to be, who you're intending to be. And that's how I like to define it. But it takes a lot of work for all of us. I don't think none of us are completely successful at living by our best self, true self all the time, but that's something we're working towards. And I like to hold up my fists and say, you know, if we're always kind of missing the mark of being our perfectly best self, but as long as the pull is towards that better self, we're going to be okay. This is just, I draw this out on my board all the time. I like to draw self-worth as a straight line kind of at the top of my board. And I personally believe that worth doesn't change. It's infinite, equivalent, and unchangeable. Sometimes people maybe have different definitions, but I think we often confuse self-worth and self-esteem. I would say self-esteem can be all over the place. We can think we're better than other people. We can think we're worse than everyone on the planet. It can vary a lot, but I think if we can hold on to our worth, our sense of worth, that can regulate to believing, hey, even though I make mistakes, I'm a mess, my worth is still intact. And then the last one I like to draw out is the self-acceptance. And I draw that as kind of symbolizing that forward movement I've been talking about, that growth mentality. It's this beautiful balance between accepting ourselves and our children exactly as they are right this moment, but doing that with this, not, oh, well, get over it, this is just how they are. No, or how I am. It's like, no, I'm a work in progress. I love myself exactly as I am right now, but I'm going to keep working towards the goals that I have to match my actions to who I'm trying to be. Anyway, and I've got that kind of written out, so we'll just kind of, I know I wanted to leave time for more questions. Really, really briefly, another thing I use, there's not really enough time to explain this very well, but it relates kind of to that same thing where I like to teach that maybe I'll put the next one up. I often have children, even adults, diagram this out. We'll talk about that bright yellow ball right there in the middle as being our best self, our true self. And it's connected with those 8 C's that were on the last slide, just our strengths of confidence, courage, clarity, curiosity. Those are the things we want to lead our life from. And I believe everyone has one of those bright yellow balls. That's all their strengths. But we also, as humans, have these other parts. And this is just a child's example of how they diagram the things that get in the way of them being their best self. Love doesn't really fit into that. Love should be with the middle. But anyway, we'll talk about how that's what we're working on. We're going to calm down our other parts and not let them be the leaders. Another subtitle for this theory is self-leadership, learning to lead from their strengths and instead of letting their less healthy parts be the leader in their life. So that was a really quick introduction to that. So I know I've gone pretty fast, and this is the kind of concluding, we've talked about the importance of learning to help our children recognize their emotions and how they're tied to the impulses that they feel. And then we're going to work towards plans for slowing them down through learning that mind-body connection and how powerful that is to both relax our body, change our thoughts, and continue to practice those skills. And we're going to keep working on keeping the motivation alive by not contributing to more to their negative identities. They do that all on their own sometimes. So I'm not saying that's all parents' faults by any means. They do it to themselves because they feel failure so strongly a lot of times. And so anyway, that's all I have. Maria, are there any other questions that we need to answer? Or? Okay, so we have both my contact information and Maria's if there's anything that we can further help. I know Maria is a great resource for resources and information, and I'm happy if there's something that I didn't spend enough time on or didn't quite apply to your situation. I'd be happy to respond to emails as I can. I'm happy to do that.
All right, so we do have a few questions. One goes back to wondering if there's a class for parents to be trained on this and practicing with other people without your children, so you're able to have an open learning environment without using your kids as guinea pigs. I can totally relate.
Oh,
Well, I
I
know
love
give
it.
you the right approaches and reactions. So, and then a few other parents said that, well, okay, so go ahead. I said, well, a few parents said that they would love to have a support group. I mentioned that you've done support groups in the past, more for couples.
Well, at different points, I have had parent support groups too. I mean, I think that's a great idea. I'm trying to think if I know of anything like that specifically. I mean, it might be nice to even have, I mean, I often refer parents to finding like Facebook groups that have parents with children of similar functioning and or issues that can be some of those can be good healthy groups. I understand some of them get pretty negative, but there's some really good groups out there that way. No, I think that might be a good thing for someone to create. Is, uh, I I know that I don't know right in this minute. I know Family Support and Treatment Center, where I did a lot of my initial training as a therapist. I don't know what they're doing during the pandemic right now, but they've been running for years a curriculum it's based on John Gottman's work, but it's called Love, Limits, and Latitude, which is different than Love and Logic. I like it better, but it's the Love, Limits, and Latitude curriculum they do there. So that would be something worth checking into at the Family Support and Treatment Center. Yeah, but I don't know. I'd love to hear more about any ideas for groups for parents to be able to talk about these things with or to
Okay,
practice.
another question was, what are the names of the impulse control workbooks you use? Are those listed at the end of the,
They are,
okay,
yeah.
that's what I was thinking. And then a question, will there be more workshops like this for children on the spectrum? We, in our parent nights, cover a variety of topics. And so if you registered for this workshop, which you did, you will be receiving emails from the Utah Parent Center on workshops, not only in Alpine School District, but throughout the county. And so you should continue to receive information on any other workshops.
And UVU does a really nice autism conference every spring. And in fact, I think they're planning to do it in March this coming year for autism. It'll be virtual this year, but they do a really good conference on issues for children with autism.
Oh, thanks. I didn't hear about the virtual, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I believe it's the beginning of March, but I don't know if it's on their website yet, but it will be coming.
Okay, so one of the questions that looks like Teresa answered, can a school social worker or school psychologist purchase and utilize one of the workbooks you've recommended if I request it? They do have they do have budgets. So like Teresa said, I would check with them and see if they already have it. And if not, just highly recommend it.
Yeah, and I love those books. I actually learned about them I was sharing office space for a short while I was doing my own private practice with some speech therapists, and they were using them. So I loved them, and I use them all the time.
Okay, and then a question, is there a link where I can get the workbook for this? All the names of the workbooks and the books that she's talked about are at the end of the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so I would suggest Googling it.
I get most things I get from Amazon. Some of them might be on this slide right here. You've got the impulse control activities and worksheets for elementary school students. That's the full name of it. There's also one for middle school students. I didn't write that down, but there are two different versions of it. And it comes with us, at least they did. They may be just giving you an online link now to all the worksheets, but the one I got originally came with like a CD that had all the worksheets on it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Karen, so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah.